Let them misunderstand you. Let them gossip about you. Their opinions aren't your problems. You stay kind, committed to love, and free in your authenticity, no matter what they do or say. Don't you dare doubt your worth or the beauty of your truth. Just keep shining like you do.
This was done about a year ago. This is part 4 of their 4-part series on why they feel like Darlie Routier is guilty. Got lots of good comments under there, lots of good views here. Go over and take a look at this channel, and we'll take a look at some of the testimony that was given by Nelda Watts, a neighbor that knew them, as to how Darlie and Darren were reacting to the memorial that was built on their fountain. And some of the comments under here are looking really good too. Smart people. It doesn't seem to be much on the support side. But again, go over and watch the whole series. I have it in my YouTube playlist. If you get on my channel, Darlie videos are under my YouTube playlist. So yeah, go ahead and look at Prosecutors podcast, and let's take a look at this here.
And it doesn't actually enlighten them. So that's something that factors into the defense's decision, because instead of making this a 2-minute incident, they could drag it out to a 2-hour long incident where every part of Darlie and every little, flinch of the eye is scrutinized by the jury, and they may think that's even worse. The silly string incident is, one of the most famous examples of Darlie's bizarre behavior, but it's not the only one. There's also a teddy bear incident. So their neighbor, Nelda Watts, testified that the fountain in front of the home had become a sort of shrine to the boys, where people from the community would come and put teddy bears on it as like a little memorial for the boys. One day, Nelda heard a strange sound, what she described as almost something like children laughing. She looked out her window, and here's what she described into her testimony at trial. Question: what is the first noise that you heard? It sounded sort of like children laughing, that kind of thing. And what did you see then? Well, as I watched for a few minutes, Darren would take a stuffed animal off of one of the wreaths and toss it over to Darlie, and she would jump up and catch it, and then she would toss it back to him, and he would chuck it toward the vehicle. The back end of the vehicle was open, and if he threw it in, she would jump up and cheer. Okay, what else did you see? Well, he took a flag off of one of them, and she cheered as they climbed up the water fountain and put it at the top of the fountain, and it stayed there for several months or weeks anyway. Okay, then what did you see them do? Well, they started after they got most of the animals off, and I didn't stand there the whole time, but I looked again because I was waiting to go out and get the mail. I didn't want to go out there while they were out there doing that. I looked again, and they were taking the wreaths and dragging them around toward the back, I assume for the trash. And so I quickly made a run out to the mailbox to check the mail before I left. Okay, and this was on the 18th of June, 1996? Yes, sir, it was the 18th. The 18th being 12 days after both of her sons were murdered, which is very soon after. We're not talking about years afterwards. Those of you who've followed the Maura Murray case know that there's been ongoing fights, almost 2 decades later, to keep a wreath up at the site where Maura was last seen, because memorials are important, and even though, nearly 2 decades have passed, family and friends want to go back to that place and have a wreath there, have a place to remember them. And this memorial for the boys, the Routier boys, wasn't even created by Darlie or Darren. It was actually started by, community members, and this is the way they're kind of making it into a game and essentially disassembling it less than 2 weeks after the murders.
Yeah, and you guys can make up your mind what you think about this, whether you think it's significant or not. As I said before, I just really feel like this is one of those things that it just depends on which way you think the evidence is going. If you really think Darlie was attacked, then I don't know that this is going to change anything, if that's what you think based on the evidence. But to me, you have this case where it already, as we talked about before, seems like a lot of really weird things had to happen for it to be an intruder. And you have to really discount a lot of pieces of evidence. And you have to assume that there were so many mistakes made by various people who were investigating this crime. And only then can you get to Darlie's innocent, and only then if you think it's just not in her makeup to do something like cut her throat, or she's not clever enough to think of leaving a sock some distance away to try and throw off the scent, or you don't think she has enough motive to kill her kids. If you think all that's true, that's fine, but particularly when balanced against those, as we said, behavioral things, the not enough motive, not clever enough, not brave enough maybe to cut her own throat, not in the right state of mind to do those things. Well, this is state of mind stuff too. I mean, this is, what is her state of mind when her kids have been murdered? And to death, that may be true, but if this is just Darlie acting differently, then her behavior is almost sui generis. I mean, this is very stark, the way she's acting. This, to me, is not the difference between someone crying all the time and someone being stoic, you know, or even someone dealing with pain through gallows humor. To me, this is much more indicative of where she was in her state of mind. And going back to when we talked about why she would have done this and what her motive would have been, and how I just think it would have been complex. And I don't think this was like a money crime or even an anger crime. I think if she did this, there was just a lot going on with Darlie. And this kind of behavior, at one point she's trying to sell her jewelry to her housekeeper, you know, who didn't have $10,000. That's a weird thing to do. You know, I mean, so is gathering up the teddy bears, and weird thing to do when your kids are barely even buried. Of where she was in her state of mind, and going back to when we talked about why she would have done this and what her motive would have been, and how I just think it would have been complex. And I don't think this was like a money crime or even an anger crime. I think if she did this, there was just a lot going on with Darlie. And this kind of behavior, to me, is just yet more sort of weirdness. I mean, you know, at one point she's trying to sell her jewelry to her housekeeper, you know, who didn't have $10,000. That's a weird thing to do, you know. I mean, so is gathering up the teddy bears and, you know, playing basketball with them with your husband and celebrating every time one goes in the truck. I mean, that's a weird thing to do when your kids are barely even buried.
But here's the weird thing, Brett. For, you know, up until now, we've had a lot of weird behavior from Darlie, but this is the first time we kind of see Darren in the picture. It's one thing for him to kind of stand by and let her act strangely because of whatever she's going through, but the participation of this kind of game of like football or flag football or something is strange. It is the first time Darren has really raised eyebrows for me. The participation of this kind of game of like football or flag football or something is strange. It is the first time Darren has really raised eyebrows for me.
Yeah, and if you watch the silly string video, everybody always says, and Darren has said later, well, if I'd had the silly string, it would have been me doing that, not her. If you watch the video, you can tell Darren's not into it.
Oh, wow. I'm so glad that someone from the legal field has noticed that. Because I had always stated when I analyzed that silly string video, you know, Darren's posture, when his hands are in his pocket, that's defensive. And when she first starts spraying it, he gives her a double take and steps back. That type of body language, you know, and I had always preached that too, that Darren wasn't into that silly string thing. He just wasn't into it. I'm glad that somebody else that's in the know, you know, saw that too, because I don't know these people. I'll promote their channel after this, though.
He is not, I mean, he is playing along.
His eyes are downcast, and he's trying to be there, right? And like fit into the situation. But you can tell, you all have probably been in those situations before where you've just gotten very bad news and you have to go to some celebration and just pretend, and, you know, suck it up. That's kind of what it looks like. His eyes are downcast, and he does not look like he's, you know, wanting to dance around with silly string whatsoever.
And I think you're right. This is the first weird thing from him.